Oh, hello there, and thanks for joining Uncomplicated Math today. Today we're going to be looking at finding common denominators when working with fractions. And by the end of this video, you'll know the steps involved for two different ways of finding a common denominator. So let's get started. So in question number 1 and 2, we're being asked to add fractions that have different denominators. And for the purposes of this video, we're not actually going to add these fractions, but we are going to work through the first step of adding fractions with different denominators by finding a common denominator and then rewriting the fractions with that common denominator. So looking over to the right hand side here under our steps involved, we can see that the first strategy that we're going to learn about is multiplying denominators in order to find a common denominator. And the first step for this strategy is to multiply the denominators. So we're going to multiply 7 times 5, which we know gives us 35. So for step number 2, where we're going to rewrite these fractions with a common denominator, we're going to use the common denominator of 35. So down below, we're going to rewrite these fractions with a denominator of 35, but we need to make sure that we keep these fractions equivalent, meaning we need to multiply the numerator or the top number by the same value that we had to multiply our denominator by in order to get the common denominator of 35. So for our first fraction, we needed to multiply 7 times 5 in order to get 35. So we're going to do the same thing to the numerator up top. And 2 times 5 gives us 10 for 10/35. Now we're going to do the same thing for our second fraction. We needed to multiply 5 times 7 in order to get 35. So we're going to do the same thing to the numerator up top. And 1 times 7 gives us 7 for 7/35. Now, once again, we're not actually going to add these fractions because all we're looking to do is find a common denominator. But now we're going to move on to question number 2. And for question number 2, we're going to be learning about how to find the least common denominator as a strategy to find common denominators. And we can see that the first step for finding the least common denominator is to list the multiples for each denominator. So we're going to start out by listing the multiples of 6. We have 6, 12, 18, 24, 30, and 36. Now we're going to list the multiples of 4. We have 4, 8, 12, 16, 20, and 24. Now we're looking for the least common multiple. So we can see here that we have two different multiples that are the same. We have 12 and 24 are both multiples of 6 and 4. But we're looking for the least common multiple here. So we can see here that 12 is the least common multiple. So our least common denominator is going to be 12. So for step number 2, we're going to rewrite these fractions with the least common denominator of 12. So when we rewrite these fractions with a common denominator of 12, we need to make sure that we keep these fractions equivalent just like we did with our first problem. So for our first fraction, we needed to multiply 6 times 2 in order to get 12. So to keep the fraction equivalent, we're going to multiply the numerator by the same value. And 1 times 2 gives us 2 for 2/12. Now we're going to do the same thing for our second fraction. We needed to multiply 4 times 3 in order to get 12. So we're going to do the same thing to our numerator up top. And 1 times 3 gives us 3 for 3/12. So hopefully by now you understand the steps involved in finding common denominators by multiplying denominators and finding the least common denominator. Help make math less complicated by smashing those like and subscribe buttons. As always, enjoy today's math journey.